Nakamura. My name is Sage Blake. I'm a wanderer, storyteller, an artist immature. And if the footage that you're gonna be seeing right now is anything to go by, then I have the absolute subtlety of a monster truck going through a glass house. Stealth games are not my forte, so of course, what do you think my first reaction is going to be the moment that I randomly selected Spark5 as this week's game? It's a stealth-based game, and while it is at the relatively cheap price of $6, I hesitate to ask whether it's worth that much. Because on one hand, I could see the ideas in this game, and they're fairly cool. You're going to be seeing the tutorials right here on how the game works and whatnot, and at that, how specifically the Spark gameplay works in this game. But other than that, I understand what the devs were trying to do when they were making this game. It's a very cool concept, but at no point, for me anyway, does it go beyond that in terms of being enjoyable. Because essentially, it's, well, a stealth game. You're supposed to go from point A to point B and collect all the MacGuffins in a stage. The game gives you forgiveness in the fact that even after you collect all the biomass, while you still have to get to the exit, you don't have to get there in a physical body. It's still kind of a monotonous game loop just to try and get to that point in the first place. Because, well, it's a stealth game, first and foremost, so you're constantly having to monitor enemy patterns and plan around them in order to get from point A to point B. The problem is, there are several things about the gameplay that just do not support that function. The first of which being your controls. This game has partial controller support, meaning technically you can play it with a typical controller, but you're still going to need to use the mouse to navigate menus. I don't like that. It feels very clunky, it feels very misshapen, and compounding that issue is the fact that while everything looks like it's a 3D environment, and while the enemies themselves can move using diagonals, you can't. You are restricted to straight lines of orthogonal movement. Up, down, left, and right. Nothing more. And that leads into its own issues. It essentially means that while you are faster than the enemies, you're not going to outrun them, because they could easily close the distance in a heartbeat and prevent you from escaping at any point in time. Even better is the sightlines of these enemies. Now, when you think of a stealth game, you think, oh, hey, they just have a typical cone of sight, right? No, they have a box of sight in this game. It's one of many microaggressions that I have with it that just completely destroy my ability to enjoy it. I've played through the entirety of it. I struggle to say that I enjoyed it. I can appreciate the ideas. I can appreciate the work that went into this. But I don't appreciate the game, is the thing. Because, well, you're gonna notice from my rant here, there are quite a few different microaggressions that this game does for my psychosis. And none of them are good. Again, the sightlines are boxes, so it's a little funky trying to figure out where are safe zones and where aren't. And even better still, these boxes of sight clip through walls. Enemies can see you through solid walls with these quote-unquote sight lines and be able to chase you down past walls when they shouldn't have even known that you existed. That does not make for a good time. That makes for a frustrating time, and especially so when, while you do have the ability to place checkpoints anywhere you so wish, essentially meaning that you get to set the pace of your own playthrough, like it matters, because at any given point in time, enemies can easily see you, enemies can easily catch up and kill you, and if you're not constantly laying down checkpoints, you're gonna have a miserable time. Better still, even though you can lay down checkpoints wherever you so wish, even though you can lay down traps to take down enemies and make it easier to deal with the stages, the game doesn't tell you that they're limited. nor does it tell you what that limit is. That, by itself, wouldn't be much of an issue, but combined with everything else, it makes for an absolutely frustrating time where you're constantly thinking, okay, how many times can I respawn? How many times can I lay traps? Can I place traps here? Can I place traps there? And better still, when you don't know the patterns of enemies and they swing around like you're seeing here, then it makes for a moment when you can easily get caught off guard without any checkpoints up, and an enemy just so happens to swing their box of sight within your reach and say, oh hey, maybe I should kill you. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. And on top of all of that is also the fact that not only is your pickups limited, but there are no ways to recharge it within the demo. You only get to play 3 stages, which isn't much, and you also don't get any means of restocking your powers. There are also many moments in the game that are incredibly glitchy. Like, for example, you can hold down the button used to place down a checkpoint or a bomb, and kind of just spasm and slide around on the floor at the same speed as the enemies, and you make no sound with your footsteps. It's weird. Another frustrating bit that I have about this game revolves around the custom checkpoint system. Every time you die, you have to make your way back to one of the checkpoints that you've placed. Essentially, the game justifies it as you lose your physical body, but you retain a spark body. That's essentially like a floating soul, which can re-inhabit other doppelgangers on your search for biomass, which the game reasons is a plot MacGuffin. Essentially, it's what's keeping the rest of humanity alive currently. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with having games introduce a gimmick for the purposes of weaving it into the story, or vice versa. And this game does that really well. I also like the fact that all of the models and all of the artwork look fairly polished. It looks nice for a game that's only $6. But there are so many things wrong with it, and especially so in the 3rd stage, where you start to see some of the hiccups in level design come up. This 3rd stage is a switch run. In order to get anywhere in this game, you're gonna have to constantly activate switches to raise and lower laser gates. Enemies can pass through these laser gates, which the game doesn't exactly tell you. You actually have to dig up that information within the extra guide, which is going to be coming up at the end of this episode. That's unintuitive. Very unintuitive. In fact, the only hazard that appears in the demo that can damage enemies are fire traps whose hitboxes are more than a little derped. See, for whatever reason, the hitbox of the fire trap is a fixed area that toggles on and off, instead of a graduated area as the trap would imply.
Good job.
The trap takes a bit in order to fully crank out, but when it starts cranking out, it can harm you, and you're gonna be seeing in the death montage that comes at the end of this episode that can lead to issues where you perish unexpectedly because you weren't paying attention to the timer on the fire traps. By the way, that timer is 4 seconds long, then it's active for 2 seconds. Again, this information is within the supplementary material that's within the game, but honestly, if important mechanics of the game are within the supplementary material that should be notified within the game itself, that's also a flaw in my opinion. This game is trying to be a stealth game. It succeeds, but it doesn't succeed at being a fun stealth game, like, say, Mystery Inc., or potentially even Metal Gear. If anything, it turns out to be a frustrating run from beginning to end, because of all these tiny issues that you wouldn't think are issues, but they stack up to be so much more of a bother than they really are. Oh, and did I mention that it takes time in order to crank down the traps and also your checkpoints? So if you're not constantly gauging the spacing of enemies, and that's going to be fairly difficult in your first playthrough, then you're going to run into many situations where you immediately die. And again, you're the one who sets your own checkpoints. So if you're not diligently placing body doubles here and there, then you're absolutely screwed. And the final nail in the coffin of all of this, that completely kills my enjoyment for this game. Hell, it completely killed my enjoyment for this game come the 15-minute mark. Yeah, 15 minutes. Is the ranking system. My gods. Why? In order to get a 5-star ranking for each stage, you not only need to finish the levels moderately quickly, you also need to not die a single time, and that's fairly difficult when enemy patterns are very hard to predict. In a stealth game, again, where enemy patterns should be simpler to predict. And compounding the issue is the fact that while you do set your own checkpoints, per se, it's not necessarily checkpoints as you think. It's more like you're setting your own lives for the future. And while it's a cool idea, in execution, it bumbles. Because you can immediately go into a stage and 3 seconds in, die, and have to restart the stage over again. Better still, if you're trying to shoot for that 5-star rank, which I mentioned is absurd, then the moment you die even once, then goodbye 5-star rank, which means, and mind you, these stages can take a very long time, there goes a good 3 to 5 minute attempt, depending on the length of the stage. And for stage 3 especially, I gave up. I full on quit trying for the 5-star rank because it was that frustrating, and at that point, I wasn't enjoying the game. I wasn't enjoying the music, which, by the way, gets fairly repetitive. It sounds like generic space theme, and that's not something I want to hear for a game like this. I got frustrated with the art style, I got frustrated with how the traps work. I essentially forced myself to continue playing this game for a full 70 minutes worth of footage with a video in the background. Several videos in the background. I took out my headphones. I was pretty much half paying attention to the game at that point. And when a game does that, I'm sorry, it's not an enjoyable product for me. I can understand that people may enjoy this, especially since it's a relatively cheap title. I didn't.
Well done.
And part of the issue on that is because stealth games for me are a hard sell. They need to be fairly engaging, but the actions, at least for what you're doing in this demo, are fairly monotonous, repetitive, and especially in terms of the third area, it's, in the words of the Angry Video Game Nerd, feels like a where the hell do I go type of game, where you start to forget what switches you've toggled and what switches you haven't. You probably haven't even noticed, by the way, that the toggled switches aren't moving at the top of their beacons, whilst the ones that you haven't toggled yet are. It's a very subtle and easy to not notice quirk that, especially with little bits of the background here and there, can make it very difficult to understand what you're doing at any point in time, let alone how to get from point A to point B. At the end of the day, I simply can't recommend this game. But again, it's mostly a me problem on that respect. I just don't really care for what it's offering. But with that settled, I think it's about time I return to the void. Tune in next week to see whether we can uncover a hidden gem, or maybe something that should be better left hidden. Dahil again, palakit na.
Oh shit! Try me, bitch. Try me, bitch. No.